I guess we're gonna start it off with some barking. Um, as I mentioned, we are going to be talking about Florida water birds. And so today, the bird of choice, and when I say bird, I do mean the singular, is the osprey. Now, this is not the offspring, um, much like the band. This is the osprey, also known, aka, as a seahawk, much like the football team. I've also recently realized that these are also somewhat called fish hawks. Um, that is two words, I believe. That's just kind of the general trend towards their behavior. Now, osprey are they're very aggressive looking. I believe they're part of the raptor group. So if we kind of get a picture, they have this curved beak. Um, I'm doing a terrible job. This looks like a parrot. Maybe I should pull up my reference. That would be a good idea. Yeah, let's go with that. Um, so osprey are they have large muscular bodies with big muscular legs and large talons. And so you can imagine that if something has this big of talons, then you probably don't want to mess with them. Now, they aren't necessarily aggressive towards any larger animals, so in terms of humans, this isn't necessarily a problem. They are quite large. I have read that their wingspans can reach up to 5 feet, which is fairly significant. Now, large birds like this tend to have quite large um, wings just to generate a lot of power. But there's some interesting things about the osprey that I will point out to you so that you can possibly see these wonderful creatures in your everyday life, um, but also understand a little bit about how they behave in general. So that is a much better picture now that I'm looking at an actual reference. They kind of have like a darker gray to their beak area. So let me close this off. We're gonna color that in, not like that. And they just kind of have some extra. So maybe we can throw in some just some sprays here and get some larger size to this. And they have a slightly yellowish hint to their feet. I did not complete that line. There we go. So this is the osprey, and we're gonna be talking a little bit about what they do in their day-to-day life. And one of those things is make Jono jealous, because if we are talking about their normal behavior, we're going to have to set the scene a little bit. So I'm going to clear this picture off, and we're going to draw a little lake here. And you can imagine that we have maybe, here is the land. It occurs to me that I have a very large window right now, so that's probably not going to work, but we can color this in like so. So this is the water. Just imagine that there's some sky up here and some grass here. And we have um, a stand-in Jono with his fly rod. And basically, uh, Jono is trying to catch some fish in this pond. But there is one thing that he does not have that the Osprey does, and that is very, very precise, evolutionally optimized vision. So I do have decent vision, but in terms of the Osprey, which I am now going to shank the actual appearance of, uh, I don't stand a chance. And so these birds, they tend to fly fairly high above the water, and they are able to spot fish from that distance, judging very precisely the actual size and distance to that fish. And what they will actually do is turn into somewhat of a V shape for aero and hydrodynamics and plummet to the surface of the water, splashing into the water, scaring the poop out of me, and proceeding to fly away with a large fish that is much larger than anything I have caught all day or possibly in my entire life. Now, this is a common occurrence because these osprey are quite they are quite tuned for the job at hand. And so you will often see them flying by with some fish in their talons. Um, but I often have daydreams of what might happen if the bird itself were to lose focus on its grip and perhaps drop the fish it is currently holding onto oncoming traffic. I would imagine it would be quite a scene, but it would be a scene that would differ between, let's say, a semi and a convertible. Whereas some would be an inconvenience, the other would be a, possibly a day ruiner, if not a broken neck. So that is the interesting behavior of the osprey. Another thing is that they do like to perch. Often, if you see in Florida, for some reason, we have a lot of these tall concrete poles that are used for high air transferring of power. So they have power lines going in, but I believe it's on purpose. There is usually a small platform that is left on these poles, and I think it's somewhat of a nod back to nature, saying thank you for this airspace, and we will allow you to use this as a nesting ground. So the osprey will tend to build their nests up in these high poles, or perhaps if you see any of the stadiums, they tend to have the big poles with the big strings of lights like so, and almost invariably there is a just a big circle of sticks at the top of all of those poles. And you may start to think, well, that seems to be somewhat dangerous, but no, birds have figured it out. And for some reason, unless there's a large storm that comes through, or perhaps two, um, we don't have we don't usually see these osprey fall from their high perches. But they don't always just nest in these high areas. You do see them just kind of hanging out. And so, one thing that is quite common is if you have a large bridge, say over Lake Jessup, that is a lake in the Orlando area, um, then what you'll see is there is actually a lot of so this is a road and then there's a bridge. There's a lot of street lights, and if it is a nice day out, then what you'll find is that the osprey will just use these street lights as kind of a dining table. So they'll actually, I'm gonna draw in brown just to stand out. They'll stand here and they'll have their little fish, and they will just um, pretty much every single light will have an osprey on it, with a fish and just eating away. And so they're having the time of their life. But the funny thing is, almost like a switch. If it's not a nice day out, if it's really rainy, then on the flip side, what you see up on these lights is actually turkey buzzards, which is kind of a crazy sight because you're like it's like the gateway to Orlando, and then all you see are these vultures just kind of eyeing you down. Sometimes they have fish, but they're not as graceful, nor do they have the impeccable ability to dive from high, uh, to gain that aerodynamics in order to puncture through the water. So, this is one fun sight that you tend to see in Florida. Um, there is actually a fairly well known osprey who his name is Otis, and he actually lives at the T Pier in Sanibel. Sanibel is a small island by Tampa. So if you're ever at the T Pier, which is a fishing pier in Sanibel, you may be able to say hi to Otis. He tends to be a little bit more friendly if you actually catch something. So that's one little tourist attraction. But that is going to be pretty much it for the osprey talk. If there is any specific bird you want me to cover more than another, I will make sure to get it into this series, but we are kind of running out of birds. I know we do have the herons and perhaps the stork crane conundrum, but that's starting to, other than the herons, we're starting to push further away from the actual water birds. So I want to keep on the theme. There's also always the waterfowls, but to be honest, most people just see a duck and think duck, and I wouldn't say that I'm too far out of that community, so we'll see. Perhaps I can actually go and do some research myself. But for now, we're going to be moving on to the second section.